Good evening. It is 7:01 and polls have just closed here in Brevard County, as well as the majority of Florida. Tonight, I don't have to tell you, this is a historic night. The United States will choose a new president, but there are also very important local races on the ballot here in Brevard County, as well as 6 constitutional amendment proposals that you probably have voted for. So that's what we're going to be doing here tonight. We're going to be going over local results, what they mean for you here in Brevard County. And of course, we'll be also talking about the presidential race. Do not worry about that. I have 3 experts who are joining me who are going to help me navigate all the results in Brevard, what they mean, and etc. I am Isadora Rangel. I am Florida Today's engagement editor. And my guests are Chris Muro, political science professor at Eastern Florida State College, Kendall Moore, a local lawyer and former Democratic candidate, and Eric Hoppenbrouwer. He is the executive director of Business Voice, a political action committee. He's also the past president of Space Coast Young Republicans. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Great to be with you all.
Thank you.
So my understanding is that results are going to start coming really early here in Brevard County, but I want us to talk very briefly about turnout. What we're seeing is something like we've never seen before, with historic turnout by mail and early voting here in Brevard County. As of Sunday, even before the elections, almost 63% of Brevard voters had already voted. And last time I checked, our turnout was at roughly 79.5%, which does not meet the 82% that we saw in 2008, but it's still pretty good. So let's talk about turnout for a minute here.
Well, we've got big, robust turnout, no doubt about it. A lot of energy out there, a lot of excitement among voters. I'm going to start off by saying tonight, though, my prediction for Brevard County, anyway, for local races, is that we will see that no one in Brevard County that has a D next to their name will be elected to office tonight. That is my prediction here tonight, Isadora.
All right, so we do have a Democrat among us. Kendall Moore, what do you say about that?
You know, in looking at the turnout, Isadora, thus far, certainly the Democrats needed strong turnout tonight in the Democratic primary. From the Democratic Party, you did see strong vote by mail from the beginning, but obviously the Republicans came out very strong in early voting and came out very, very strong today. Will be a challenge for the Democrats tonight. We will have to wait to see how these NPAs do break as the night goes forward. But it is no doubt, as we can see from the results starting to pop out now, the Republican turnout was extremely strong.
Yeah, so let's take a look at those numbers right now, what we have here. And by to say, total turnout is at 80.09%. That's pretty good still. We have 111,000 Democrats turning out and 165,000 Republicans turning out. And we see obviously a difference here between, how people have turned out. We see obviously Democrats with more mail ballots, and then we see Republicans that it seems like they really preferred voting early this time. And this is obviously in line with what the predictions have been from the beginning, right?
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, Republicans have done an excellent job in Brevard County of registering voters. The gap between Democrats and Republicans is the largest that I've ever seen it. And they even increased it before the deadline for the general election. Republicans have been far ahead on fundraising and campaign spending. I think it's a bigger mystery to figure out if Taylor Swift is going to vote for Kanye West tonight, rather than if a Democrat's going to win a seat here in Brevard County.
I like that analogy. So we do have some early results in local races. Like I said, we get the results from mail ballots and early voting pretty early. It's 7:05, and our supervisor of elections, Lori Scott, has already posted some of those very early results. So let's take a look at them, and I'm going to share here my screen with you. And can we see that? Okay, we cannot see it, so we'll just talk about it here. So we have Donald Trump obviously leading in Brevard County with 54 to 44%. Obviously, these are early, but Chris, you spoke to Florida Today earlier this week saying that Trump pretty much had to stay above 56% in Brevard County. Can you explain why?
Yeah, I think that in order to make up for some of the other regions that he might be struggling in the state, if he has if we're going by media accounts, he has a deficit with African American voters. He has a deficit with Latino voters. And if those things are true, he definitely needs to stay above 56%, I believe, in Brevard County in order to have a stronger showing here and to be able to carry the state of Florida. So I think anything below that is going to be a razor thin margin.
Yeah, and actually, it seems like you're right, because in 2016, Donald Trump got 57% of the votes here in Brevard. In 2012, Mitt Romney got 55.62%. So it seems like you might be onto something here. Eric, you're a Republican. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do, except for the fact that Mitt Romney and Donald Trump are two different animals as it pertains to their candidacies. And one of the big things that we got to look at here, at least in Brevard, is the enthusiasm is what's driving a lot of that early turnout in person by Republicans. And just nationwide, we got to see if that trend continues. But Chris is not far off.
So let's take a look at some of the very local results for Brevard County. And I want to go to State District 50, which covers North Brevard and part of Orange County. And I think this was surprising to many that the Democratic PACs were getting heavily involved in that race. That's the seat is Rene Plasencia's. Rene Plasencia is the incumbent. He's a Republican, but Nina Yoakum is challenging him. And Democrats seem to think that they could actually snatch the seat from the Republicans. What we're seeing in early voting and mail ballots is that doesn't seem to be happening at this point. Kendall, is this a concern? Did you really think that the Democrats could win the seat?
I mean, I know one of the things, Isadora, that we talked about was varying regions where Democrats thought that there were strong chances. And as you saw, North Brevard even flowing into Volusia, and I think probably tonight before we're over having some discussions about Seminole County, I mean, those were places where the Democrats thought that there were options. And you are correct. It did bring in some pretty significant dollars from outside of the county, outside of that local Central Florida area, even some national dollars in that race. And I think as was mentioned earlier by some of the other commentators, it's going to take that kind of money even for Democrats to compete. Doesn't appear that it has made a difference in District 50 tonight, but I think we continue to look around the periphery, particularly in Seminole County, to see where also outside dollars played a very strong place for Democrats, to see if it made a difference there as well.
Yeah, and let's move to the southern part of Brevard County and to State House District 53. That's Randy Fine is the incumbent. He's a Republican, probably one of our most high-profile Republicans here in the county, and he's being challenged by Phil Moore. We see him with mail ballots and early voting. He's leading 52.5 to 47.19. And Eric, you and I were talking about this race a couple of days ago because it's a very interesting district, because it is, although Republicans do have an advantage in voter registration, it is one of our closest districts here in Brevard in terms of where Democrats can have a chance.
So down south, where Palm Bay is predominantly most of the voters there, in District 53, it's a 3-point spread in terms of registered Republicans having an advantage versus Democrats, and Districts 5 and Districts 3 at the county level are close in terms of it's about 5 points for each. So what you're seeing here is basically in those squishy districts, as they're called sometimes, a lot of times MPA votes and how they tend to go on these races tend to have a lot of weight, and typically Republicans after their primaries, Randy Fine being one of them, will target directly those MPAs and those third-party ballot folks with issues that are concerns to those folks to try to get them to vote for them.
Yeah, it seems so far that it's paying off. And also, let's stay in South Brevard too. Let's look at County Commission District 3, which covers roughly the same area as district as Florida House District 53, and that's John Tobias, the Republican, is the incumbent, and he's being challenged by Sanjay Patel, who ran for Congress a couple of years ago, so you might remember his name. And what we see so far with early results is that John Tobias is leading 52-47, very similar to the margin that Randy Fine has there. And Kendall, I want to hear from you. You know, what have Democrats done in that district? Because we know that this was a race that the Democrats did not want to leave, did not want John Tobias to run without an opponent, and Sanjay kind of jumped in last minute. But was there, you know, how much of a ground game was there to try to take the seat away from him?
You know, I think on the ground, Isadora, it was strong to say the least. And that's a very interesting collective geographic area that we will watch tonight. South Melbourne, the city of Palm Bay. You have multiple city races there, plus the 2 county commission races in District 3, District 5, and then House District 53. When you talk about an overlay, you've got 7 or 8 high profile from a Democratic Party perspective races in that geographic area. And I think not only were dollars in place, but there was a significant ground effort across those 7 or 8 races in that platform. So it'll be very interesting tonight to see how the Democratic candidates fare D3, D5 in the county commission, as well as House District 53. I mean, I think it's pretty clear to all of us, numerically speaking, in terms of registration, those are the places in Brevard where the Democrats do have the best opportunity.
Do you think there's still a chance for the Democrats to win these seats, given that so many Democrats voted early? I mean, we don't know how many votes this actually means. We know that these are early votes, but we don't know exactly if it encompasses all early votes. But do you still see a chance?
Right. Not knowing what it encompasses, we will see when you start to see the actual votes come back from Election Day. But, you know, we were having this chat, you know, Chris, Eric, and I earlier, when you start to talk about the way that the turnout came this time, certainly the Democrats did show very big in vote by mail. But I think the president talking about concerns relative to vote by mail did drive many Republicans to either show up in person as an early voter or in person today on Election Day. And so the hope was that the Democratic numbers would show very strong early based upon the high Democratic vote by mail turnout. So I think the best that we can hope from a Democratic perspective is that these are more early votes than they are vote by mails. And then we will start to see as the night progresses on for who showed up today.
Well, yeah. On the supervisor's website, it does say that Republicans have a 20,000 vote lead in turnout today on Election Day, and early in mail-in balloting, totaling, you know, that there's also a substantial Republican lead. So I think just based on the data we're seeing now, I think it's going to be very unlikely. Although, you know, there's a couple of these races that are tight. Obviously, District 3, District 53, State House are still tight, but I still think the Republicans have an advantage.
And I want to also add that mail-in ballots were something that the local Democrats were focusing on, at least into about 2 weeks of mail ballot returns. They had about a 20% advantage down there in the south end of the county. And that's definitely something that the local Democrat Party was focusing on. And I think it ended up hurting them in the end because, as we've kind of noted, their returns today and in early voting were less than both MPAs and Republicans.
So now let's talk about County Commission District 5, also a very watched race this cycle. That's the race between the incumbent Christina Snarty, who's a Republican, and the mayor of Palm Bay, William Capote. Right now, Snarty is leading 56-43. So she does have a better margin, say, than what John Tobias has in County Commission District 5. I mean, she seems like she's on a path here potentially to secure her seat again.
Well, I don't know if Kendall would agree with this, but from what I've seen, I think Sanjay Patel's ground game was definitely more involved and engaged than Mr. Capote's. Would you agree with that assessment, Kendall?
I mean, that's certainly the case. The other thing that you have in District 3 versus District 5 amongst the 2 Democratic candidates, You have a great disparity in fundraising between County Commissioner Christine Isnardi and Mayor William Capote as well. Christine Isnardi did very well there on the fundraising side, which was going to make it a challenge for Mayor Capote. And as you know, both of these candidates, Mayor Capote currently on the city council, Christine Isnardi previously, in a lot of ways, this was a race for the heart and soul of Palm Bay. And so tonight we see Christine Isnardi starting to pull ahead a bit. And so I would agree with you, the Sanjay Patel ground game. Hey, look, Sanjay Patel has a special weapon called Stacey Patel, and that certainly helps in that regard. And I think they certainly put significant time and energy into the ground game in District 3 on behalf of Sanjay Patel.
And Stacey Patel, for those who are not familiar with local politics, she is the chair of the local Democratic Party. And I want to move on to a different race, which is the race for the mayor of Palm Bay. This is a nonpartisan race where we have Rob Medina running against Kay Mirage. This is a runoff race. So there was a race in the primary. Rob Medina came slightly ahead, but didn't go past the 50% threshold. So now we have a runoff today. And Rob Medina right now is leading 52-47. This was also a race where people were very invested, in particular the parties. And I always find this very fascinating that although these are nonpartisan races, both parties have been heavily involved, heavily invested in supporting their candidates, because Mr. Medina is a Republican and Kay Mirage, I believe, is a Democrat. Am I correct, Kendall?
Yes, that's correct.
And this is the largest city here in Brevard County. So can you guys tell me about these candidates? What have you seen from them and any insights you might have?
Well, there were mail-outs that went out, calling Dr. Filiberto and Thomas Gomez the conservative stalwarts, which, I suppose it's most people would assume that conservative means Republican and liberal means Democrat. So it's partisan by other means here. We're not letting the voters know when they go to vote who's a Republican and who's a Democrat, but we sure are doing it, outside here by associating these candidates with ideologies and philosophies. So I'm not sure that, again, that does a service to the voter, withholding this information from the voter. Eric?
What's funny, back in the 1980s, House Speaker Tip O'Neill once said, and is famous for saying, all politics is local. I spoke with Dave Berman from Florida today on Friday and said, because of social media, I think it's flipped. And so what we're seeing is national politics are really getting infused into our local politics. It's kind of an inversion as to what we've been dealing with historically. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing the returns we're seeing today, which is to say the enthusiasm for the president and his reelection energized much of the Republicans to turn out and vote. Whether or not that down ballot got those kinds of help, I think determines whether or not that the candidate actually tried to tie themselves to the president. We saw that in the mayor's race for Melbourne. I haven't personally seen anything from the Palm Bay races, but we do know that Medina works for Congressman Posey, and we know how close Congressman Posey is with the president. So I think that had to have a factor in terms of factoring in to the results that we're seeing so far.
Yeah. So let's talk about two other results in the city of Palm Bay. Again, our largest city here on the Space Coast. Let's look at two seats on the city council, seat two, where we have Donnie Felix leading with 52.7% against Peter Filiberto with 47%, only 2 out of 16 precincts reporting. Also in Palm Bay, seat number 3, we have Randy Foster with 60% versus Thomas Gom with 39. It seems like Foster has a more comfortable lead. And Mr. Foster did run for a county commission a few years ago. So maybe he has that advantage of the name recognition, I assume.
Right. Randy did run previously in a county commission race, has continued to remain extremely visible in the Palm Bay city related events, and fairly frequent person visible at city council meetings. And Mr. Foster has run a really great campaign and campaigned very, very hard. You may remember Thomas Gaum as a prior challenger for the currently seated city council member Kenny Johnson, which was another very well talked about race. And so again, Mr. Foster, Mr. Felix look like they worked together this go around in the campaign. And again, we've talked about the Democratic versus Republican Party participation in these local races. Palm Bay is a place where the parties have certainly shown themselves to assist the candidates in all three races throughout this season. And for these two particular races, I think looks like the two Democrats tonight are ahead, at least in the city council races.
How do we? I'm sorry, I just wanted to know, Kendall,
Yeah.
how do we explain that the two city council seats are Democrats, or those who affiliate with the Democratic Party are in the lead there, but the mayoral race, the Republican or the affiliated with Republican is leading? How do we explain that split ticket vote?
I still don't, believe that there's any monolithic party scenario, regardless of where we look. Each individual candidate and race is going to stand on their own. And I think I can certainly vouch for watching the Felix and the Foster campaigns. There were a significant number of personal doors touched by those two candidates and campaigns along the way. And I think that ground game for those two specifically made a difference tonight. The Rob Medina race was going to be a challenge for the Democrats. I do believe Kay Morrell ran a very tough and solid race. But Mr. Medina has been somebody who's been on the ground and in the forefront of politics through his employer or otherwise for quite a consistent time. And so I think that was the difference in the challenge so far in the mayor's race.
Yeah. And by the way, for more election results, go to floridatoday.com. We have a live database with all of these results that we're talking about of all races here in Brevard County, if you want to stay on top of that. And we'll also be doing stories about the winners and all of that. So make sure you follow us. And if you're not following our Facebook page, please do so. And now I want to move to the race for Melbourne mayor, which Eric mentioned. It's a four-way race, which I hate those races because I think there should be a runoff system in all of these municipal races. I think it's just unfair to the voters to let somebody get elected with, say, 30 or sometimes even less in the votes, but that's for a different live stream. But if we can share my screen here, we see that Vice Mayor Paul Alfrey, who has been perceived as the front runner, is leading the race with 5 out of 22 precincts reporting. Hazel Buggs, who is a well-known community organizer, has run for office before, is in second with 28%. CJ Johnson, who was kind of the person splitting Republican votes with Paul Alfrey, although this is not a partisan race, is coming in third. And Molly Tasker, who's a former city council member, coming last with 13%. Very interesting how this has sort of split the Republican County and the Republican Party. And Eric, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this.
Well, let's just be honest. When two Republicans in a race together, it's always a race to see who is the most conservative. And both candidates in their own ways tried to define that they were the most conservative. And I think in the end, even though it got pretty dirty between the two candidates, I think what you're seeing is the voters are saying to us which one that they thought was in fact most conservative. And that's the only reason why we can really tell is because of that 4-person race and because of the number of other opponents that the voters had to vote with. I'd say that for the most part, CJ had run against Paul 4 years ago for the District 5 race and ended up losing there. So this is not exactly a big surprise, but I'd like to give CJ some props because the race was run fairly well.
Yeah, but it did get pretty nasty towards the end. I mean, I wouldn't say nasty, but there were questions about CJ Johnson's, whether he actually had resided in the city too long, and city council actually had to vote to decide whether he was even eligible to be on the ballot. And I believe there were flyers that said that showed these are all the Republicans running in mayor. And for mayor in Melbourne, and Paul Alfrey was on it, but CJ was not. So at least that's some of the kind of the stuff that I've been hearing. So very, very, very interesting here. And also, by the way, Melbourne has three races for city council. We see the incumbent Tim Thomas leading in his race. Yvonne Minus is also leading. She is a sitting councilwoman. And District 5, I believe, that is also an open seat, correct?
That's
District
correct.
5 is, yes.
Held by Paul Alfrey.
And we have Mimi Henley leading in this one. So, and before we start, we're going to keep looking at results here, but let's go back to turnout, because we kind of talked about it in the beginning, but I want to hear from Kendall and Eric. Are you guys happy with the turnout for your parties, or do you wish it was better, or how are you feeling right now?
I mean, I think from a Democratic perspective, and we've talked about it previously. I heard a quote, and we've been quoting others on this, and I wouldn't particularly use these two words, but I've heard it stated, and I think it best describes what was going on for these races, and it was.
Looks like we have lost Kendall, so let's move on to Eric, and then we'll get back to him.
Well, let me say that at least on Kendall's part, not that I want to speak for him, the top of the ticket obviously affected turnout for Democrats here locally, I assume, because as we're looking back in 2008 and 2012, Democrat turnout was higher in those two elections as opposed to this year. And like I said, I think the thoughts are, the coronavirus definitely defined how everyone voted, at least in the primary. And I think it drug on for Democrats into the general election because you saw those early mail-in turnouts for Democrats as opposed to day of. And at last I saw, MPAs were actually in real numbers voting more so on day of than Democrats. So that was something that surprised me. But for Republicans, I hate to be so monolithic in my comments, but the president sucks the air out of the room and also energizes the base. And I think that's one of the big reasons here in Brevard. Even though he didn't hit that 57% that Chris had alluded to, I think that drove down ballot results. And we see that everywhere except for in Palm Bay.
Yeah. And I think even with great turnout, it would still be challenging for Democrats to pick up seats in Brevard. So let's be clear that this is the voter registration numbers are still in the favor of Republicans, no matter how hard Democrats might work, right? Get the Republican Party still has a pretty good control in that sense.
Well, those of us who watch, obviously we're looking at South Brevard because of those exactly. Numbers were so tight, and that's why I think it definitely shows in early numbers how those early voting numbers for Republicans are affecting the total so far.
Yeah, and I want to talk about something else, Eric, that is I know you have been very involved with, which is the referendum to renew the half-cent sales tax for infrastructure at Brevard Public Schools. It passed originally in 2014 with I can't find my numbers here, but it passed with a pretty substantial margin. The question is to voters was whether to renew it for another 6 years, and that money is being used for facilities, technology, security. And right now we're seeing here we're 62 out of 171 precincts that so far it looks like it's doing better than even in 2014 with almost with 69.14%. This was something that I think Brevard Public Schools was very nervous about, right? Because this is money that they could potentially be losing for all these projects.
So yes, the Business Voice decided to support this referendum for several reasons, in which I put on an op-ed that's on floridatoday.com. I think everyone should go read it because it's definitely a pro-business look at why the sales tax supports the local economy. Obviously, it helps kids, but it also helps to improve real estate values, which we have seen real estate values increase here for a number of reasons in the past 4 to 10 years. But what I think is important, at least as far as the Republicans voting in support of this referendum, is the fact that there's no new debt. It's basically pay as you go. And it's something that most people believe that sales tax are paid by everyone because it's a consumption tax versus a property tax. And I think what we're seeing in terms of the president changing the way that the parties view the issues that are most important, and I guess I'll turn a phrase, this is a Brevard first kind of initiative. And that's why I think we're seeing the returns almost at 70%. Local Republicans want to see young people and the economy thrive. And I think this is one of those ways that the government is actually helping with that proposition.
Yeah, and by the way, back in 2016, when Trump won, obviously with a very comfortable margin here in Brevard County, voters also approved another half-cent sales tax for the Indian River Lagoon. And that is, I think, a big, when we talk about, we assume that both parties are monolithic. I think that's a good example that debunks that myth. I mean, I don't know if it's a myth, but sometimes it can be an exaggeration that voters seem to be more comfortable with local taxes where they know where the money is going. There is a citizen oversight committee that looks at how the district is spending this money. It seems like they're more comfortable with something that they know is being invested back in their community versus, when we start talking about more federal taxes, and then we start seeing that the parties fall more in what we would expect them to do, right? Seems like the local seems to always prevail in these situations.
Well, it's often folks say that they join the Republican Party here, even if they don't think of themselves as Republican, because they want to vote. And so that definitely does redefine what it means to be a Republican here to a small degree. But I think also, like I said, what we're seeing is that, as in you put it very eloquently, that, when money is put back into the local economy, when it's done for purposes that are local, people are more open to taxes being, in this referendum, it was a renewal. It wasn't even a raising of taxes. So folks won't see any increase. The first referendum was actually proposed at 10 years and then brought back down to 4 years, because the school board was a little bit concerned that Republicans here wouldn't vote for it if it was a 10-year tax. And so what we're seeing here is that they're increasing it a few, 6 more years now, so that it'll round out to over, 10 years. So I think that's a vote of confidence by local Republicans voting for the referendum for a second time.
Well, let's remember that before 2014, when the school board referendum was approved, and I wrote a column for Florida Today in 2014 opposing this half-cent sales tax. You could go back almost 30 years, and every one of these referendums were defeated. So the fact that it was approved in 2014, again, the lagoon tax in 2016, there's definitely been a change. Now that you've got this renewal, as Eric pointed out, it's not a new tax, but once you let the genie out of the bottle, it's pretty hard to put it back in. I vote no on this personally. Because I think that the school board has enough money, and they have to learn how to do what to maintain and develop the infrastructure of our schools with the money that they already have. But obviously, my argument didn't carry weight here again, because this is a resounding yes for the half-cent sales tax.
Isadora, the one thing I'll add, I think it was great commentary from the others, but the big challenge this year for this particular referendum was placing a tax on the ballot in the midst of COVID. And it was a renewal year, so it had to be done. And I will go as far to say that this year, certainly with the help of many, but the Brevard Public Schools earned this one this year. Perfect audits for 6 years, showing that they did what they said they were going to do with the money. And Eric and I have had this conversation multiple times in the last few months. Just a year ago, safety and security in schools meant guns. It meant Parkland. Now it means COVID and safety from a health sense. And so the fact that you were talking about doing things to facilities and making them better during this time appeared to resonate tonight. So it is a big night, certainly for Brevard Public Schools.
Yeah, and by the way, our editorial board at Florida Today, we are the opinion arm of Florida Today. We also recommended voters vote yes on the sales tax renewal for I think you both already made good arguments about it. But if you look back at when Parkland happened and all the districts across Florida were scrambling to fortify their buildings and campuses and make them less accessible to the public, Brevard seemed to have a leg up because they had been doing those improvements such as fencing. I think there's still quite a bit to be done. But one of the things that Misty Belford, one of our school board members, told me is that all school buildings in Florida have a single point of entry, which is a big deal when we're talking about keeping campuses safe and making sure that hopefully we never have something happen like it happened in Parkland. But let's go back to our local results. It seems like business as usual here. So I'm just going to share my screen with the viewers one more time. We see Donald Trump with 108 out of 171 precincts in Brevard County reporting, leading with 56%. Joe Biden has 42. If you remember, Chris Muro said that Trump needed to stay above 56% in order to perform well in the rest of Florida. Of course, these are only results for Brevard County, but one of the things that actually Steve Shale, who is a Democratic strategist, worked for the Obama campaign, told me was that Obama won by managing margins in counties that are red. Not that he was ever going to win them, but he had to decrease the margin in which he was losing. So, Kendall, are you seeing here, is there, I mean, I don't know if you're looking at other counties at this point, but is there truth to what I'm saying?
You know, the margins here, and we talked about that statewide around, was a little concerned when we talked about turnout and margins. Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade, the Democrats really needed to perform well, very much there to get the margins that were needed to cover counties like Brevard County in that regard. And I think tonight we may chat a little bit about some of the others, what's happening in Duval, what's happening in Pinellas, what's happening in Seminole. But certainly those would be necessary for Joe Biden to have a chance and a good showing to win Florida tonight.
Yeah, and if you want to have those numbers, and then we can start talking about them. I don't know if you have them right now, Kendall, but feel free to interrupt me at any time so we can talk about those other counties. Although we are focused on Brevard, it's obviously when we're talking about the presidential race that we look at everybody. So, and we can get back to that in a few minutes. But now the incumbent for Congress, Bill Posey, is leading with a very comfortable margin against Jim Kennedy. The incumbent in Senate District 17, Debbie Mayfield, also leading very comfortably. Same for Renee Placencia in District 50. That's a North Brevard district that also covers Orange County. So we see here that Nina Yoakum, although she was a pretty strong challenger in terms of attention that she's gotten in Democratic PACs, getting involved to try to help her win. Right now, she's trailing in this race. In Florida House District 51, that covers parts of Cocoa as well as Cocoa Beach, Tyler Soroy, the incumbent, also leading against Joan Majid. In District 52, Thad Altman was running against a newcomer, Lloyd Dabbs, also leading. That's a heavily Republican district. Makes it very hard for any Democrat to win. And now let's go back to that Southern Brevard district, Florida House District 53, where the incumbent, Randy Fine, continues to lead with by almost 9%. Kendall and Eric, I mean, what do you guys have to say about this one? Disappointing for Democrats, or how are you feeling?
I mean, obviously in Brevard, numerically speaking, in terms of registration, HD 53 is the best chance and opportunity for Democrats. And I know that they will consistently and continually make an attempt to field solid candidates in that particular race. I think Chris mentioned it earlier. I mean, we saw significant dollars in this race from Randy Fine. And we also saw him certainly focusing on not only NPAs, but even starting to target some of the Democrats in his ads, in his mail, and in his other things tonight. That is always one, as we talked about, that the Democrats remain focused on. But it looks like tonight that Randy Fine is continuing to perform.
Yeah, and also Phil Moore ran against Randy Fine back in 2018. Do you think, and feel free to be honest, do you think Phil Moore was the right candidate to go up against somebody with a lot of money? And we know that Randy Fine tends to campaign in a very negative way, and he certainly had things to talk about Phil Moore with his 20 plus traffic tickets for speeding and all of those things that he brought up 2 years ago, and I'm sure he brought them up again this year. And there was all that issue with the text messages going out. I mean, is there a need for Democrats to field stronger candidates who can really take up on an incumbent like this?
I mean, I think you certainly need what I call all three pieces: the right man or woman, the right message, and the right money to make it happen. And you've got to be able to marry all three of those. And certainly on the monetary side, as a seated House member, your publication has done quite a bit of coverage on both the hard and soft money that played in that race and others. And Randy Fine had no shortage of it. You asked the question earlier, and Chris was referencing how and why there's such a focus by the parties on the lower level races in the cities. And I think part of it is building a team for the future that will have an opportunity in county commission, state senate, and state house races. And the Democrats will continue to build candidates. You saw two of them tonight in Palm Bay City Council races that were successful. The larger that team becomes and the more prepared that they are for the larger races, if they can get the right message and the right money to go with the candidate, that will give the Democrats the stronger chances in the future on the higher end races.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that in a county like Brevard, where the numbers are obviously against Democrats, that seems to be running in these nonpartisan races seems to have been your kind of your best shot, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we talked about that before. You know, the demographics and dynamics in South Brevard do create the best opportunity for Democrats. I mean, when you start to look farther north, I know Eric and I have talked about, we'll use it District 4 in the County Commission as an example. That's probably plus 20, plus 25 on registration for Republicans. And so the better opportunities will consistently continue to exist for Democrats in South Brevard.
Yeah. And one big race that we have not talked about is the race for Brevard County Sheriff. So Sheriff Wayne Ivey won in 2012. He won 66.5% of votes. Now he had a challenger, Alton Edmond, a Democrat who was he was getting a lot of buzz from the media and also on social media. But it seems like Ivey is doing pretty well still. Right now he has 65.2% versus Alton Edmonds 34.7%. And I remember Alton said that he was going to do better than a lot of people expected. What do you guys have to say about this?
Well, I think Wayne Ivey is one of the most recognizable Republicans. Many people have called him a kingmaker. He endorses a lot of people, and I'm still trying to figure out if anybody he's ever endorsed has not won their election. So I think Wayne Ivey is very strong and very influential, a great fundraiser, excellent politician, and an excellent sheriff. I think he's going to be a tough person to beat.
Yeah, and Chris, I'm just going to ask you to look at the camera when you're talking to us.
I'm sorry about that. I was looking at the.
That's
my
totally
bad.
Fine. That's fine. And let's, for voters who are not aware, I mean, if you live in Brevard, you obviously heard of Sheriff Ivey, but I mean, how powerful is he? I mean, like you said, Chris, that when he endorses candidates, those candidates seem to do well, but he also has influence over the county commission, as we have seen when he asked for a critical needs budget. I mean, how far does his power go in Brevard County? Especially, I don't think he's just influential with Republicans, but he's also a power player even among Democrats, right?
Oh, no question about it. I think even people that live in Virginia, Michigan, that I know have seen Sheriff Ivey's postings on social media, YouTube, and the like. So he's not only a well-known figure in Brevard County, he's well-known all over the country.
That just speaks to his great ability to communicate. And I think with above any other attribute, communicating directly to voters and having that direct communication is critical. And that's why you see the sheriff being as popular as he is. I mean, on the flip side, you have Randy Fine down in District 53, who I think No other candidate in the Republican Party here locally could run a race that tight in terms of margin from Democrats and Republicans without being able to communicate like Randy Fine does. And, love them or hate them, they directly communicate with their voters. Sheriff Ivey is well known for actually doing a lot of community-based events. He's not just online. He does a lot of events at churches, and that type of direct communication or contact with voters is what really is a lasting advantage for candidates, and it's really something that many candidates need to understand going into their own races.
I go to Light Up Viera every year, to kick off the Christmas season, and Sheriff Ivey is one of the biggest draws at Light Up Viera. So you're right, Eric. He knows how to do it.
Hey.
And let's talk about Alton Edmond, because he's a young guy. He's 32 years old, I believe. No law enforcement experience. He's a lawyer who does a lot of criminal cases. And he decided to run against the sheriff kind of late, like a few days before the filing deadline. And he was, I think, part of it, he came during this time of protests about Black Lives Matter, and then after the death of George Floyd. Ken, are you disappointed that he hasn't done better? I don't think there was any expectation that he might actually win this race.
Right. I think you spoke about it. Attorney Alton Edmonds, a smart young guy in this community, 31 years old, started out as a public defender, ultimately in private practice today, made the decision to jump into this race. And I think likely everyone knew that this was a significant challenge running against Wayne Ivey. I do think raised $150,000. Had not had political experience in the past, but certainly had a good showing for the first go around, considering who his opponent was, in this particular scenario. So certainly a positive first time push. And I would be led to believe that whether it's for sheriff or something else, this would not be the last time that we would hear from Alton Edmond. I had the little joke that I referenced with him before. Everybody's talking about lack of qualifications, and my answer to that is he's a lawyer, and lawyers can do everything in that regard.
He's not biased. If you look at his name tag,
so when it comes to that, when you referenced Sheriff Ivey, I think Chris Muro talked about it. Not only from the law enforcement side, but Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, socially and civically, he is everywhere. And it's almost like it functions like an ongoing perpetual campaign in lots of ways. And he's been able to turn that into something viable, not just for himself. Chris used the word kingmaker, but with the ability to endorse others and a variety. And so I think Sheriff Ivey on this go around, almost $500,000 raised from a campaign perspective. And so when you talk about a countywide race for a Democrat against someone as popular as Sheriff Ivey with a $500,000 budget, that's a pretty tall order in that regard. And I think Alton's a really smart young man. He knew exactly what he was taking on in this race and stood tall. So for what he's been able to accomplish, he should be proud tonight. And I, again, highly doubt that he goes away after this. There are future political opportunities out there.
For an office that might be more achievable in the future. Is that what you're saying?
Hey, look, I've run for offices too before when people said they weren't achievable per se. And so if you have fear in this game, it's probably not the game for you when it comes to that. But, I say it from just a strategic perspective. I don't think that he had any misnomer about, what he was running against. But he decided he was standing tall in his principles. And I certainly don't fault him in any way for that. And getting in certainly gave him a large name ID on a large platform, and we'll see where that goes from here.
Yeah, and we brought up Cocoa previously, so let's look at the race for Cocoa mayor, where you have 5 people running for that office. You have 2 former mayors, you have the incumbent, you have a port commissioner, and you have a lesser-known candidate. Right now, former Mayor Michael Blake is leading with 10 out of 12 precincts reporting. He's got 36.3%. In second, we have Jake Williams Jr., who is actually the incumbent. not surprising. Actually, Florida Today's editorial board recommended Mr. Blake. I'm not saying that we had any influence in this race, or perhaps it's just a coincidence, although I would like to think that we are able to influence elections. But I mean, if you live in Cocoa, you know the name Blake. And if you're a viewer from Cocoa, you know Dick Blake, who is Michael Blake's father, former Rockledge council member, also the first Black principal post-desegregation here in Brevard. Do you think the family name kind of seems to be carrying him?
I mean, I think there's a variety of things when you talked about that at play. You said it very interesting. Two former mayors running against a seated mayor and a port commissioner, and an additional one tonight. But we see the emergence again from Mike Blake. One, as you said, the Blake legacy name. There was a generation even before Dick Blake, but Dick Blake, 40 years elected, decades as a teacher, Monroe High School principal, at Cocoa High School. And then Mike Blake also has been in the education system for 30 years. And so when you talk about over the last 50, 60 years, there's a strong chance if you went to school in Cocoa that you were either taught by or had a principal with the last name Blake. You combine that with Mike Blake's prior performance. If you recollect the last time when he won the mayor's race, he won every single precinct in Cocoa the last time. And so I wouldn't write it off as just name. The Blake name is certainly a strong one that doesn't hurt, but coming back again, and he campaigned on this reemergence of Cocoa. New city manager. Tonight we have another new mayor, and they will have a new police chief. Looking forward to a bright new day in the city of Cocoa.
Yeah, the police chief, Mr. Cantaloupe, is retiring in December, said he is going to retire. That's going to be a big job, especially nowadays with everything that's happening in the country. I mean, and Kendall, I know you're probably more involved in Cocoa than any of us here, but I mean, how big of a deal is that to pick a new police chief? That's a pretty big job.
I mean, I think it's strong, and the choice of the police chief was actually a critical issue in this campaign that was heavily debated by the candidates in multiple forums and in multiple venues. And so the selection of a city manager, Stockton Witten there now, and the upcoming retirement of Chief Cantaloupe, as you said, two very, very big steps for Cocoa. So tonight, remember, in the city of Cocoa, with the other two city council seats, 3 new people joining Councilman Goins and Councilwoman Cost there. Majority of the council coming in new. Obviously, Mike Blake having been there before. Again, I think it's a fresh new opportunity for Cocoa. Really expecting big things there.
Yeah, and surprisingly, Henry Parrish is one of those former mayors who was running. He left office in, was it 2018 or 2016? Forgive me for not knowing exactly. He left office to run for the state house, lost. Pretty also has a legacy in terms of his family. He owns a bed and breakfast in town. His family has been here for generations, but it seems like in this case, that name recognition has not paid off for him. Like, we try to guess why that was the case?
Well, I don't want to steal any of Kendall's thunder, but I looked about 10 minutes prior to close the book here, and the Dr. Joe Lee Smith Recreation Center precinct was the only precinct in the county where Democrats early voting and on election day were beating Republicans. So that may be one of the biggest factors as to why Mr. Blake is coming out on top. We talk about the fact that the Democrats have not shown up in large part on early voting and on election day, but this precinct was in fact the only one in Brevard, at least as of 10 minutes prior to the end of the close of the voting, that had a distinct Democrat lean in terms of voter turnout.
Yeah. And Mr. Blake is a registered Democrat, although this is an nonpartisan race, and Mr. Parrish is a registered Republican. And let's also look at the other results here in Cocoa for City Council. Lavender Hearn leading with 60%. And we have in District 3, Rip Dial also leading only 4 precincts. I didn't know there were so few precincts in Cocoa. And let's go back again to the race for Melbourne mayor with 21 out of 22 precincts reporting. Seems like Paul Alfrey is winning this race with 38.3% of the vote, followed by Hazel Boggs. Again, this is not a surprising result. Like, Paul Alfrey, not only was he the best funded, but he also got a majority of endorsements in this race. Our editorial board, just for full disclosure, did recommend Hazel Boggs in this one. And then we also see here for Melbourne City Council, District 1, Tim Thomas is ahead, and so is Yvonne Minus in District 3. And District 5 seems to be a closer race with Mimi Hanley leading the pack over there. What races have you guys really been paying close attention to? Obviously, outside of the presidential race, let's be clear.
Well, this Palm Bay mayor still focused on that. Looks like Rob Medina is pulling ahead from the last time we talked about that. And of course, Palm Bay has had some challenges. It's the largest geographically and population-wise in Brevard County, and I think a lot of people are really hoping for a return to good, stable governance, and it is a very important component of our community. So this is a very interesting race with big consequences.
Yeah, and Palm Bay, has had so many issues in past years. There was an FBI and FDLE investigation that resulted in 2 arrests last year, and there's a recent arrest perhaps a month ago of a developer who was accused of trying to bribe city council members. What to corruption and bad stuff going on, and obviously former deputy city manager Davis Nardi pleaded guilty, but we still have 2 other cases going through the court system. We don't know what the outcome of those are going to be. But is there a reason why Palm Bay seems to be this center of bad stuff going on? I can't find another way to say it, but what is it with Palm Bay that makes it so complicated?
Well, in my personal view, the most important issues really aren't the individuals, but the rules of the game. You talked about earlier, Isadora, that it was a topic for another show, but having a runoff or not, having a primary election or not having one, having it nonpartisan or partisan, having these elected single-member district or at-large district, all of those structural rules really go a long way in determining the quality of the government and how responsive it's going to be to the people it represents. And I know maybe this isn't very exciting to talk about, but I think these are the most important issues long-term, addressing the structural nature of these elections. And with the problems we've had in Palm Bay, I think it's time for that conversation to take place.
And what changes would you make?
Well, I would be in favor of partisan elections. I would be in favor of single-member districts, and I would be in favor of having, for Melbourne, Cocoa, having a primary and then having a general election so that you don't get a candidate elected who gets 30% of the vote.
Yeah. I have an issue with that as well, because if you have, in the case of Cocoa, where you have 5 people running, you can win with 30% of the vote. And is that really representative of what the electorate actually wants? But I disagree with you with partisan elections. I think we have enough partisanship in the country. And I think when it comes to local levels, I think the issues should matter more than whether you have a D or an R next to your name. Because I think people are really looking for solutions for their communities, and I think making them partisan, I don't think it helps. But
I wish the voter was as sophisticated as you're implying. I just don't think that's the case. I don't think the evidence tells us that's the case.
Yes. And by the way, we've been looking strictly at Brevard County, but polls in the Panhandle are closing in exactly 1 minute. So we're going to start seeing more state results being posted on the Florida elections website. So we hope to start flipping our conversation to take more of a broader look at the entire state. We'll talk about the presidential election. We'll also talk about those 6 constitutional amendment proposals. There's 2 big ones that I'll be watching. One of them is whether to raise the minimum wage to $15 by 2026. And the other one would be open primaries, which I think would really change the way that we pick elected officials here in Florida. Some people love it. Some people hate it. That's the open primary amendment. So, and before we move on to that, I just want to say that we're seeing votes coming in very quickly here. I'm looking at Lori Scott's website, 156 out of 171 precincts reporting. This election seems to have been pretty smooth, without a lot of the issues that a lot of people were foreseeing, right? At least here in Brevard County.
Well, so far Broward and Palm Beach, are always an interesting variable. But I mean, I don't want to get ahead of us here. But right now, statewide, there's a 20,000 vote variance between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Just to show you how close this is, out of more than 9 million votes that have been cast. Again, a 20,000 vote variance.
Wow. And
I think we're gonna have a lot to talk about tonight.
We will, definitely.
Isadora, before you go on, I think you made a great point, and we have to do it at some point. To give a shout out to our supervisor of elections. I mean, this was a very well-run election during contentious times in our country. Lots of things that are going wrong in a number of places with election apparatus, with voter suppression. I mean, you name it. I mean, it was a challenging time. And don't recollect that there have been people complaining about the apparatus here locally. So again, you know what I mean? Kudos to our supervisor of elections, and something that I think we all, regardless of where we are on the partisan scale, are fighting for. Fair, free, and open elections, and it looks like we did accomplish that in Brevard County this cycle.
A good call, Kendall. I think Lori Scott, not only is the website one of the best of all 67 counties as far as providing information, but I went to vote early, and all the protocols of safety, cleanliness, and security, I thought was just world class. So I'm with you, Kendall. Hats off to Lori Scott and all of the people that work for and with her.
And I can't be remiss to not be the Republican to say that I voted by mail. And Lori's website does a great job of letting those that vote by mail know that their vote has been collected and then counted today. So to those Republicans concerned about mail ballots being counted or getting to where they needed to go, they didn't have that problem here in Brevard because of Lori's work.
Okay, so do you guys want to talk about state results now? It seems like that the elections here in Brevard are pretty settled. So I'm just going to go over some of the top results again before we move on. And I'm going to actually share my screen with you again. We see Donald Trump winning Brevard right now with 57%, above the 56% threshold that Chris mentioned that he would need in order to run a healthy campaign in Florida. The incumbent Bill Posey running for Congress also leading with 60%. State Senator Gabby Mayfield on the path to victory here as well. Renee Placencia also winning here with 66. And you guys are not seeing my results. Oh, there you go. I apologize for that. And in District 51, we see Tyler Soroy, the Republican incumbent, seems to be on the path to win re-election. So is Thad Ullman in District 53. That's the Central Brevard District. Randy Fine in Southern Brevard. We talked extensively about this race, also leading with 55 to 54%. And there were all these questions as well on whether to retain judges and Supreme Court justices, and it seems like they're all being retained, at least if Brevard County decides those results. In the race for Brevard County Sheriff, Wayne Ivey, the incumbent, the Republican incumbent, is winning with 65%. Alton Edmond is trailing with 34%. For County Commission District 1, that's the North Brevard District that covers Titusville, Mims, and other parts of North Brevard. Commissioner Rita Pritchett seems it's poised to win re-election at this point, and so is Commissioner John Tabaya in Southern Brevard and Commissioner Christine Isnardi. And there are many municipal races. Please go to floridatoday.com to follow those results. So can we talk about what are we seeing right now across the state? And I'm having issues here looking up results myself. So I'm going to let you guys take the lead on this one for a second.
As Chris noted, and I keep looking down at my screen here, it's a 0.5% for Donald Trump in terms 48 or 49.8% to 49.3% right now. And obviously we're looking at the Panhandle is the last portion of Florida to be able to vote, and they actually have an extra hour because they're in Central Time Zone, and typically they vote dark red. So, but anything could go because there could obviously be a recount in West Palm or any of the other supervisor of elections that have had trouble in the past. So it's too close to get comfortable at all.
Well, that is true, but you definitely, I mean, Donald Trump has gone ahead now by about 40,000 votes. And like Eric pointed out, the remaining counties that are outstanding typically vote overwhelmingly Republican. So this is a good spot for Donald Trump to be in, as the polls close at 8:00 over there in the Panhandle. So very interesting race, very close. Again, Florida, a true swing state, a true battleground state. Must win for Donald Trump. Donald Trump must win Florida in order to continue on his path to 270 electoral college votes.
We know that Donald Trump cannot lose Florida in order to win, but it seems like right now 49.9 to 49.2. Is there a chance for Joe Biden still to flip this?
Oh, well, no question. This is a razor thin margin right now. Remember, 2016 was 113,000 votes between Trump and Clinton. So yeah, like Eric said, we're not calling it a night yet. This is gonna be a cliffhanger.
So in 2016, AP, the Associated Press, called this race at 10:50 p.m. What is your prediction? When will we call Florida? And let's not worry about other states because that might get too messy.
Yes. I don't know. I think probably the way things are going, probably the 10:30, 10 o'clock.
Yeah, and it's also Florida actually does a really good job counting mail ballots because in other states they cannot start counting until the day of the election. In Florida, they're able to start counting much earlier. Don't you wish that all states kind of follow the Florida example when it comes to when they start counting?
Well, who would have ever thought somebody would say Florida is the model for elections?
That's why I was laughing at myself, but.
Maybe you got to have a hard one to get better, I guess, So
we learned from our mistakes.
Yeah, we are a long way from hanging chads.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating. We're getting some state results on those amendments too. Or amendments also, let me say, those 6. Amendment 2, the minimum wage. I wrote a column in Florida Today opposing Amendment 2. It's at 61.6% of the vote right now statewide so far. That's just over that 60% threshold. Yeah. And Amendment 3, so that's a close one. We're still not calling that one yet. And Amendment 3 with the open primaries is only at 56% of the vote. It needs 60%. I wrote a column on that opposing Amendment 3. So I must say I'm pretty excited about these numbers so far.
Yeah, and I see Adam Wolf asking, when will we have the results? I don't know which results he's talking about, but it seems like I would assume he's talking about the presidential results. That's the question I just got here on Facebook. And I think it's hard to make any predictions, but it looks like Chris believes that around 10 o'clock we'll know who won Florida. So stay tuned. And by the way, go to Florida Today. Like if you're wondering where we're actually reading all these results, go to floridatoday.com. We have a couple of databases there for you, which include the results for these amendments that we're talking about. So let's talk about the amendments again. I wanna stay on this topic for a while. And I'm very interested about Amendment 3. So let's explain what open primaries are. So essentially what Amendment 3 would do in races for governor, state cabinet, and the legislature, you would have a top two primary system, whether people would vote on all voters would be allowed to vote in the primary, and all candidates, regardless of party, would run in the same primary, and then the top two candidates would move on to the general, regardless of their party affiliation. And this is something that supporters say forces candidates in the primary to appeal to a broader segment of the electorate versus just the very, very highly partisan voters. Our editorial board actually recommended against Amendment 3. I personally feel it's a good idea because I don't think that this will solve all of our issues, but I also think that when it comes to the polarization that we're seeing here, if we don't have incumbents who are only trying to appeal to the farthest extreme of their parties, maybe it would be easier to meet in the middle. Do you guys disagree with that? Because we have two very partisan people here with me, Kendall.
No,
You disagree with me, so I know I'm in the minority here.
I'll take a stab unless you want to go
ahead. I think we would agree.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was saying I think that we would agree. Interestingly enough, Isadora, this is something that both parties came out publicly opposed to in that regard. And my concern, with that open primary scenario is if we end up in a state scenario where the state is leaning toward one predominant party, that could really take off like a rocket with an open primary system. And so not only was I opposed to it personally, Democratic Party came out opposed to it, the Republican Party came out opposed to it as well. And so I think the maintenance of the party system and the way that it is operated for me seems to work just fine. Get a little concerned about one party's ability to take over in an open primary setting.
And go figure, I'll agree with Kendall, but obviously I'll have to bring different ideas to the table. Parties operate, and there is some concern as to how the parties are operating right now with voters, and that's totally understandable. But the purpose of parties is for people with like-minded ideas to come together and to politically organize. And so to make these primaries open, or jungle primaries as they are in California, skews the whole purpose of organizing together as a political party. What you would see is even smaller factions of people getting together and getting even smaller portions of voting blocks. And I think a lot of the apathy in terms of the voters in general on the two larger parties is in part one of the issues as it pertains to how people view this amendment. Because if they only got engaged with the parties and had the parties reflect their values, then you'd see the two parties actually reflect the voters as a whole. So as you can see in the presidential elections, once the primaries are over with, they have to turn to a more moderate pose. In terms of their messaging, because they have to have a broader coalition. And while that doesn't necessarily happen in the states because they're smaller and because the thinking on certain issues is could be more polarized, that the purpose of the parties is to get people together, organized, and that amendment would completely make the parties useless. So
yeah, but you say some people don't see it as an issue to make parties useless, and I tend to agree with that. That a lot of times when you see party operatives pulling things like the so-called writing loophole, where you ask something to file as a write-in so you can close the primaries, I think that's just deceptive and it's just bad for democracy. But we'll agree to disagree on this one, because I want to move on to Amendment 1, which was, I think a lot of people were scratching their heads about Amendment 1. That's the amendment, and if you voted, you saw it. changes one word in the Florida Constitution. Instead of saying every eligible voter is allowed to vote in Florida, it says only a citizen can vote in Florida instead of every citizen can vote in Florida. And really, in practice, it doesn't make a difference. So why was this even on the ballots if really nothing is going to change if it passes? And right now, by the way, at very early results, but it's running with a 78.2%.
I think it was put on the ballot to lure people out to participate, which I'm not really sure that it had that effect, because it already in Florida statute, chapter 97 of Florida statutes, it already has that language of only. So this type of amendment is absolutely useless. Like you said, not only does it not have an effect, but the language is already in general law that they're trying to add to the state constitution. So it just seems to me as a ploy to maybe bring out a certain segment of the voting population. That's my theory.
Yeah, it seems, I think that's kind of what everybody has been saying, but our editorial board recommended voted against it because why are you going to change the Constitution if nothing is actually going to change? I don't think there's anybody who's not a citizen and shows up to vote saying, I read the Constitution and, this is my interpretation. I don't think that's how voter fraud gets stopped. And we know that there's very little indication of actual voter fraud going on. But yes, I think everybody was baffled by this. But I want to talk about the other amendments, and they are always very fascinating to me. By the way, they need at least 60% of votes to pass. So even though if you see a constitutional amendment proposal would say 50% plus of the votes, that might still not pass. And that's something that's put in there so it's not too easy to amend the Constitution for good reasons. But there was Amendment 4 would have actually made it even harder to amend the Constitution by requiring constitutional amendment proposals to pass twice. Can we talk about that? Who is behind this? Because we know that there are a lot of big interests, economic and business interests who were advocating and fighting for this because they want to make it very hard and to amend the Constitution, and I think also very expensive, where only groups with a lot of resources can actually do it. But you guys might have a different opinion than I do.
Well, I'm always in favor of, and I know this might sound counterintuitive to some folks, but I'm always in favor of putting up new roadblocks to offer amendments to Florida's Constitution. I think we amend the document way too frequently, and we add lots of frivolous and superfluous stuff to our state constitution. So I think it's like I supported the 60% rule back in 2006. I kind of like some of the new requirements that the legislature has been proposing. But this particular Amendment 4 really doesn't change the game because it would have to be approved in 2022 and then in 2024 in two subsequent elections. Are voters really going to be that dramatically persuaded to overturn a vote? It's highly unlikely. There's only one other state that has this, Nevada. And it hasn't changed the game there. Will it make it more expensive? Not really. I mean, it only would if you had to go through the petitioning process. Again, that's where the real cost of putting an amendment on the ballot is. And that doesn't do that.
Yes.
But it doesn't look like it's going to pass, Isadora.
Let's look at Amendment 4 here. Right now it has 51.3. Remember, there's a requirement of at least 60%. So it looks like, at 51, I think voters want to maintain that ability to amend the Florida Constitution. I actually thought this would be a very tough sale because you're actually telling voters that their power is diminished by this. So I always thought it was a very tough sale for most voters. So let's look at Amendment 5. That's that one. Very expected that it would pass. Right now it has 74.7%. That one actually extends the period that if you were a homeowner that you have to transfer your homestead exemption from 2 to 3 years. So let's say if you move and you get an extra year to transfer your homestead exemption, that was put on the ballot by the legislature Our editorial board recommended voting yes on it. I think we don't have to really explain why. But let's go back to Amendment 2. That one is probably the most controversial amendment. And right now, again, with only 36% reporting in the state of Florida, it has an advantage, but albeit not a very large advantage. It could easily fall below the 60% threshold. And Chris and Eric, I know you're both against Amendment 2, which would raise the minimum wage to $15 by 2026. The USA Today Network had a fascinating discussion about it with the person who's promoting this, who was John Morgan, the trial attorney, famous from Orlando. But what are your thoughts on Amendment 2?
Go ahead.
Well, I think that discussion had a lot to do with what people, in terms of the voters, are talking about or thinking when they get into the booth. John Morgan made a very emotional and passionate argument for helping those who do not get paid $15 an hour to get paid $15 an hour. And then there were those who are in opposition who was trying to, and we were one of those groups, trying to explain to the voters during that discussion why it actually hurts those that it intends to help. So it's just another thread as to the conversation that we're having nationally as it comes to these moral issues that, when put to the voters on constitutional amendments, like we do have here in Florida, it's a toss-up in terms of what the voters as a whole are gonna see in terms of the effects of that amendment. So business interests are obviously going to be against it. As one of the members of the Florida Chamber, our organization knows that only 2% of wage earners actually make the minimum wage. So we can make all the arguments that we want, but it comes down to the moral argument versus the financial one from our side of the debate.
Kendall, you're a Democrat. I want to know what you have to say.
I think the challenge for me, Isadora, has always been one. I am both a Democrat and a business owner, right? And so I fully understand the point of where Eric may be coming from. But what I've always been is a living wage person. And the living wage concept for me is simply this: when you've got people that are well-intentioned, who follow the law, who go to work every single week, who work 40 hours a week, even in two-income households, and still cannot live in average places in Florida, you know what I mean, with those wages. Something has to be done to be able to elevate the base, to be able to live according to that standard. Now, we may debate whether or not, $15 is the appropriate number, but I do believe, and I always have been a supporter of the concept of a living wage. And so moving it in that direction, albeit I am a business owner, albeit I represent business interests, I do think that moving the minimum wage north to make it a livable wage is a positive thing. The other thing, I think Eric talked about John Morgan. He is someone who certainly knows and understands the amendment process, and he knows and understands how to influence voters. And so this one is trending correctly tonight. It is above 60. As you said, Isadora, it is very close. If for some reason this year it does not make it, I think John Morgan has proven that this won't be the last time. So we'll probably see it again if it happens to tick below 60 tonight.
Yes, and we only have 5 minutes left. We're going to be wrapping up at about 8:28. But let's look at the presidential results. According to USA Today, I'm looking at our website right now. Donald Trump is leading with 50.5%. Joe Biden has 48.7%. 86% estimated vote counted. I have not seen if anyone has called this race, but please correct me if I'm missing something. It's very hard to manage a live stream and watch for that. But what are you hearing from Democrats, Kendall? I'm sure they're blowing up your phone right now.
I mean, I think what we've been talking about for the entire week, certainly there was the desire to win Florida. And Eric mentioned earlier that we do have some pretty red places of the state that are remaining where the votes have not been fully counted. And if Joe Biden does not win Florida tonight, I think the positive part for Democrats as we look around the country is that we believe more than President Donald Trump that Joe Biden does have some alternative pathways to the number of electoral votes needed in order to succeed tonight. And so we would have loved for him to win Florida, but if he does not win Florida tonight, as I said, there are other pathways. We believe more of them than there are limited opportunities for the pathways to 270 for the president. So we'll be looking at some of the other states that I think we talked about, some in the Midwest, Pennsylvania, and some of the others as we move forward here tonight. But with the race still being this close, still feel very comfortable for the positive opportunity for Joe Biden to be successful tonight.
And can we talk about individual counties? We had talked earlier about key counties in Florida. We see right now any states that have been, any counties, I'm sorry, that have been flipped. We see that Biden is leading in Duval, which Trump won back in 2016, but then the county flipped blue in the gubernatorial race in 2018. But is this a matter of low turnouts in some of these heavily Democratic counties like Broward and Miami-Dade? What is leading Trump? What is helping Trump lead in this race right now?
I think there's two parts to it from a Democratic perspective. Part number one is the traditional. I mean, I think the base always is necessary that South Florida, Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade not only have to perform, they need to overperform. But aside from that, starting to look at some of the other areas, to see Duval, which appears to have gone for Biden tonight. Obviously, Tallahassee and Leon standing strong. Looking over at the Hillsborough and Pinellas area, in the Orange County area, those, you know what I mean, need to be there as well. But then we're looking on the fringes at some of the Seminoles and others that may stand tall tonight. The final straw for that Biden ultimately needed is in places like Brevard or even in Southwest Florida, even though the predominance may be a Republican, the Democratic turnout was necessary so that we couldn't get too far behind in some of those heavily Republican areas. We really needed all of those to be accomplished tonight for Joe Biden to have a strong chance in Florida.
And I'm going to actually have to end this live show right now, but I want to thank you all for being here with me. And I really appreciate you sharing your expertise. And for the voters and viewers, please go to floridatoday.com to see the final results. Thank you all for watching again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Isadora.